for mobility professionals. This is Inside Intertraffic.
Hello again, welcome to another podcast where we talk transport as we stay inside Intertraffic. This is Paul Hutton with another Inside Intertraffic podcast as we keep up with our conversation while we wait for the 23rd to 26th of March next year when we will meet in the Rye. On today's podcast we talk STEM subjects for girls, that's science, technology, engineering and maths, with Sandra Witzel, Olga, Anapryenka and Reddaway, and then continue the discussion about encouraging women into transport with Jennie Martin and Carla Jakeman. Balancing things up on today's Inside Intertraffic.
This is Inside Intertraffic.
So let's start by talking about the Women in Mobility London Hub, which launched in March, aiming to raise the visibility of women in our vibrant sector. My colleague Kevin Borras spoke to the three co-founders, Sandra Witzel of SkedGo, Olga Anapryenka of Steer, and Reddaway of AppyWay, and they discussed the thinking behind the launch, the aims of the newly established network, and the innovative methods it's using to attract new members and spread the message being that a career in the mobility sector is something women should aspire to.
I met the Women in Mobility German hubs, or a lot of the people from the German hubs last year through social media and then also through events. They do a really great job in Germany, providing a networking platform for women, increasing the women's visibility at events, helping with speaking engagements, sharing job descriptions, that sort of thing, and just generally providing a fun and interesting platform for women in the mobility sector. They've been growing steadily over the past 5 years. They've now got 10 hubs. They've just launched a hub in Vienna as well. So Austria is in the mix, Switzerland. So then I offered, if you ever consider bringing this out into the English-speaking areas, then I'd be happy to launch a London hub. And through that, I connected with Olga and Annie, who were really interested in as well. And I guess we all feel that while there has been an improvement in terms of increased presence and visibility of women in the mobility sector, we're still not where we want to be. There's still a lot more work to be done. So this is a timely event to organise this now.
Probably just also to add to it is that in general, looking at the government stats, you see that around 20% of the transport sector workforce overall in the UK are women, and 20% it basically tells you that women are underrepresented, and changing this number will bring the benefits to the industry. Diversity brings different views, and it can be really, really beneficial. Pushing it forward would be a good task for Women in Mobility Hub in London.
Because if you look at Intertraffic, where you've got 38,000 people would come to Intertraffic, obviously it's going to be March next year now. You look at the percentage of women in a show like that, it's much, much higher than 20%. What do you think the reasons are? I'm going to ask Annie this. What do you think the reasons are for women being unrepresented in a sector where they're actually very well represented in trade shows, expos, exhibitions? You go to conferences, look at the seminar program of a mobility conference. It's not, in a lot of cases when I've been to the last few years, it's not far off 50-50 or even more.
So I actually came to this from an events background. So when I first came into the industry, it was organising B2B events, mainly in America. And one of my big tasks personally was to increase representation of women. And it really depends on the area you come from. So I started off doing a lot in pure automotive, which is very, very male dominated. But I think in a way, you're right. It's changed a lot over the last few years, especially since I joined. There's been a lot more effort on behalf of the trade shows themselves to increase representation and diversity. And I think there has been some change. I think the word mobility, so a lot of the newer mobility-related fields do seem to have more women represented than the traditional ones in automotive and engineering, rail, for example. I think they still have quite a large male representation. You've got a lot more women increasingly in leadership roles or business development roles. For example, so Olga was saying that only 20% of those working in transport in the UK are women. I saw that 4.5% of those are actually in engineering roles, not necessarily the ones attending the trade shows. So I think it's been great progress made, but there's still quite a long way to go, especially in those STEM subjects.
That's a shockingly low number, but how do you get those numbers up? Because you're not going to have attracting, say, 18-year-old, 19-year-olds who already got their degrees and their curriculums are sorted out. So you're going to have to attract much younger people, maybe the 12, 13-year-olds who aren't sure what they want to do, and make engineering an attractive prospect for girls to get into. But how do you do that?
One of the aims is if we increase the visibility of the women in the sector, then hopefully that will encourage more girls to get involved in STEM subjects. I actually went to, embarrassingly, an all-girls school, and I could probably count on one hand the number who went into, actually I don't think any of us went into engineering, and that was quite a long time ago. But for me, I think visibility will be a big help, feeling like it's not just male dominated.
Potentially would like to organize a series of lectures at schools and go and talk to the younger generation, and so kind of trying to explain what it takes to work in mobility, to work in the transport industry, and through this and spreading the word, will attract younger generation to apply for the degrees in universities or to apply directly for the roles in transport sector.
So I'll ask Sandra, what's been holding women back then, in terms or holding girls back from 10, 11 years old, when you start to realise what you're good at, what you might want to do as a career, get careers officers come in at age maybe 13 or 14 and say, what do you want to be when you leave school? Is that the fact that then girls are not being shown an engineering career because it's not deemed suitable? I mean, now it's 2020, not 1960s. It's bizarre to think that's still happening.
As Annie and Olga have said, it's definitely improved, but I guess we're talking about the same issue then that the general tech sector faces, that it's not enough women coming in from the bottom, but then also not enough women rising to the top, and not enough funding going towards women-oriented businesses. So there's a whole chain of events that contributes to that lack of women. If you look at it from an education sort of point of view, is what you can't see, you can't become, because you don't see a lot of women found. I mean, now you see a bit more, but it's still not quite equal, the number of women founders in tech, the number of women VCs that fund women-led businesses, that sort of thing. It's still underrepresented, and mobility kind of combines a bit of transport and a bit of tech. So these influences come into the mobility sector quite strongly.
Women in Mobility London invite all female mobility enthusiasts to join the group, from students to CEOs, industry leaders to academics, tech gurus to government workers. Everyone's welcome to discuss the future of mobility and collaboratively create a better transport future. And if you want to find out more, you can at womeninmobility.de/London. That's womeninmobility.de/London. And somebody who will find that music to her ears is one of my next guests, Jennie Martin, who is Secretary General of ITS UK and has been in the transport industry for about 25 years now, if not longer. And Jennie, when you first came into the industry, when people think that it's male dominated now, goodness me, it was completely male when you were first involved.
Yes, Paul, that's absolutely right. I joined ITS UK in 1998, but I'd actually joined British Rail, the station division, straight from university back in 86. And my job in between was at the Corporation of London in the City Engineers Department. So I've really been in and around mobility since 1986. And certainly the situation now it's just not even comparable to how it was in the mid 80s. I remember, obviously very young, very green, not at all confident, being in meetings of 20 fairly senior railway men, and them all turning as one at me and saying, "Is it okay if we take our jackets off, miss?" And if any psychologist needs any sort of illustration of what passive aggression looks like, just that scenario would form an excellent case study. That was all about, why are you here? except for serving the coffee.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that when you and I worked together at ITS UK, I'm pretty much the first man that you've worked with who people haven't assumed you're my secretary.
That's absolutely true. And again, it's amusing when you're later in your career and a bit more confident and a bit more sure of yourself. Very, very intimidating earlier on, I should think. But since I've been Secretary General of ITS UK, you are the third senior male member of staff I've worked with. And it's absolutely true. The first two, it was automatically assumed lots of times, both in the UK and abroad, that I was his secretary. And as you know, we've had one amusing occasion when it was slightly reversed and somebody assumed that you were my chauffeur. I only wish that ITS UK actually had the sort of finances that allowed for chauffeurs.
I think that would be a glorious idea. You heard a little giggle in there. That's our other guest on this little chat, which is Carla Jakeman. And the reason I've asked Carla Jakeman from Innovate UK to join is because ITS UK is getting more and more gender balanced by the fact that Karla is the new vice chair of the organisation. Karla, first of all, congratulations on being vice chair, but in talking about women in transport, what's your experience been like, and do you feel that the comparison of what Jennie was saying about 20 years ago and people calling her Miss now becomes that we're moving on and we're getting to a position where actually gender is less of an issue than it used to be?
I do think that we are moving on slowly. I'm certainly from an automotive background, which was incredibly male dominated. I do think that we are slowly seeing some changes, but it is very slow. Talking to my great aunt, who's 91 yesterday, and she was the first female ambulance driver in 1985 in the whole of Warwickshire. And it's thankfully areas like that have really changed. But then, as I'm sure Jennie will attest to, quite often we are the only females at a meeting. And I think there are more and more panels and keynote speaking events and things like that where there are more women. But until it moves from a situation where having women on the panel for a tick in the box exercise to really demonstrating that they are there because they deserve to be, I think until we get to that stage, we can't say that we're there yet.
Now, Kevin was discussing there about why girls at school aren't encouraged into STEM subjects. Well, from my personal experience, my daughter went to an all-girls grammar school and she couldn't have been encouraged more into STEM subjects. She was everywhere. It was almost rammed down her throat, the whole idea of you must do a STEM subject, otherwise you'll actually be letting the school down, was almost an impression she was getting. She's hoping that, assuming everything's opened up again, she's heading off to university in September to do English.
I think with regards to STEM, it's a case of getting the balance right. And certainly I'm a STEM ambassador as well and look after the STEM activities at our school. And I do think that we need to encourage, but it's getting the balance right where you're not dictating that children must do a STEM subject. But I think it's really important that we do encourage them, but for the right reasons, not to let the school down or, again, for that tick in the box exercise, but because they deserve to be able to do them. They're capable of doing them and they have every right to be doing those science and technology jobs as anybody else.
And Jennie, if we were to imagine that your first day working for British Rail in an extremely male-dominated industry would be the start line on 100-metre race, and then the finish line is when actually nobody even bats an eyelid about gender. It just isn't something that is of any consequence at all. How far down that sort of 100-metre race do you think we've reached in 2020?
I think we're well over the halfway mark. I mean, the situations I described, I mean, another one was at the Corporation of London, and that was mid-90s, no, not that long ago now, where I complained about the topless calendars on certain engineering office walls in the building, not out on site, in the actual distinguished Guildhall itself. And that ended up with me being in the wrong, not the people with the calendars. That sort of thing just wouldn't happen now. And what I think has really changed, and I know Karla's 10 years and more behind me, so her take on this would be interesting. I think I'm the last working generation of women who experienced the actual hostility, where it was quite clear made very clear to you in meetings and on site and in all different environments that you shouldn't be there. The men did not want you there. That has totally gone. I mean, Karla's absolutely right. We're often one of two women in a meeting, or we're by ourselves as females in the meeting. But there's no longer any feeling from the men that they don't want us there. What's missed, and I think that's the most important thing, that hostility and that very strong feeling of what women should and shouldn't be doing. That's going. It's going for men as well. I mean, I think there's quite a groundswell about the fact that it's wrong that we don't have more male primary school teachers. It would be good if we did. So I think it's loosening up for both genders, and that tells me that what's needed now is, as Karla said, for girls to be given the full range of options with no waiting. I mean, I don't think any school or any parents should push girls to do English over STEM subjects or to do STEM subjects over English. It should just all be laid out as these are your options and you take your pick. And I think that's what's missing. Once we've achieved that, because there is still a lot of well-meant nudging in certain directions and often for girls away from STEM. Once we crack that one, then the workforces should, I would have thought, in the next 20 years or so, be balanced.
Yeah, I think Jennie's absolutely right. And with regards to the 100-metre race, I'd probably say that we're about 60 metres probably, I'd say, something like that. There's still a way to go. And certainly I've been in meetings where I've been with a male colleague who could be junior to me and asked a question, and the person answering has answered the question looking at the male, even though it was me who asked the question. So, those kind of situations still happen. But I think it also helps when you build your own reputation as well. And that's really hard to sort of demonstrate that you're there because you deserve to be there. And I think the more we can do that, the more we get women into those areas, then that's going to demonstrate to our children and our nephews and nieces, etc., that it's the new norm. It should be, as Jennie says, it should be both for male and for female when it comes to different, like primary school teachers and things like that. So it should be across the board. She's quite right.
Talking about role models and people that the younger generation can look up to, we've had a series of them on this Inside Intertraffic. Thank you to both Jennie and Karla there for joining me, and for Kevin's guests earlier on in this podcast. And that wraps up this Inside Intertraffic. Thank you very much for listening. Remember the dates. The 23rd of March is when Intertraffic will be starting next year, when we'll all be together in the Rye. In the meantime, virtual conversations on our podcast will take place, and we'll have another one for you in a couple of weeks' time as we stay inside Intertraffic.
Inside Intertraffic is produced and presented by Paul Hutton and is the official podcast of Intertraffic.